Hello and welcome to Cosmological Arguments. I'm your host, John Bannan. Debunking Atheism, Volume 13. In this video, I'm going to go over the genie in the bottle objection. Now, this is an atheistic argument for why God doesn't exist. And I'm going to present it to you, and then I'm going to tell you how to get out of it. The argument basically says that if God is omnipotent, omniscient, omnibenevolent, then surely that God knows what you need in order to believe that that God exists. And he has the power to give it to you. So, and he's all loving, so he would want you to believe he exists. So why doesn't he give it to you? How come every person in the world doesn't have the proof necessary to believe that God exists? So the fact that atheists exist, people who do not believe in God, proves that God is not providing proof to every person who lives that God exists. God is omniscient. God knows what it would take for you to believe he exists. So he knows what you need. He's omnipotent. He has the power to give it to you. So, and he wants to give it to you because he's all loving. He wants you to believe he exists. So why doesn't he do it? So why are there atheists? So the argument is, well, because there's atheists, then this God does not exist, because otherwise there wouldn't be any atheists. All right, so that's the basic argument. Now, how do you get out of it? Essentially, this argument is what I call the genie in the bottle argument. And it's essentially saying, why isn't God like a genie in a bottle? Why doesn't God grant all our wishes whenever we want, especially the wishes that are good, even the wishes we're not even aware of? Why doesn't he just give us everything that is good without us even asking? An all-loving God, why wouldn't an all-loving God do that? He certainly would want his children to be as well off as they possibly could. So why doesn't he grant every wish every good wish we want, even the wishes we're not even aware of that we should have? So why isn't he like a genie in a bottle? You know, you get a bottle with a genie in it, you rub it, the genie comes out, grants you whatever wish you want. So why isn't God like that? Why isn't God the genie in the bottle? Well, it has to do with the nature of miracles. When you ask for a wish from a genie, you're asking for a miracle. You're asking for God to directly intervene in your personal history and change the ordinary course of natural law and the law of physics in order to grant you your wish. That is what we commonly call a miracle. So this question of why isn't God like a genie in the bottle really boils down to, well, why doesn't God grant miracles all the time to whoever asks for it? Why isn't God a miracle granting machine like a genie in the bottle? Isn't God omnipotent? Doesn't God have the power to grant miracles all the time, whenever God wants to, as many miracles as he wants? So what's going on here? Well, the answer is miracles are complex. They are rare. God rarely performs miracles. They're few and far between. And that's why God is not like a genie in the bottle, because God rarely grants miracles. So, well, why is that? Why does God rarely grant miracles? Certainly, God has performed miracles. Um, it's just that they're rare. They're few and far between. So, why is that? The answer to that can be found in one of the cosmological arguments for the existence of God, called the dichotomy of existence. Now, I've done a video on that, and you can watch it. But the idea is that there's this dichotomy of existence between everythingness and absolute nothingness. They're both uncaused sides of a dichotomy, a special dichotomy of two uncaused sides. And the one side is God. God is the gatekeeper of everythingness. And the other side is absolute nothingness, which is also an uncaused abstract concept, meaning the absence of God and all of his creation. So, on the everythingness side of the dichotomy, what that means is uh, God is capable of creating everything that is logically possible in physical reality. In other words, everything. God is capable of creating everything that is logically possible for physical reality. That is what I mean by everythingness. So God is the uncaused reality that has control over the creation of physical reality and the creation of whatever God decides to create within the realm of all logical possibilities, uh, called everythingness. So this God is uncaused, meaning uh, there was nothing that created God. God didn't come from some place. God has no causal explanation for his existence. God simply exists. Uh, God is not subject to time, so you can't really say he's always existed because he's not subject to time. But God exists. He's uncaused, meaning he's not made of parts. That also means that because if he was made of parts, he would be caused by those parts. So God is what we call divinely simple, not made of parts. But because God is uncaused and not made of parts, you can't destroy God because destruction is the disassociation of parts. If you don't have parts, you can't be destroyed. So God being uncaused cannot be destroyed. Um, but because God is uncaused, one of the parts of God or nature is these powers, the power to create physical reality. Um, and that power, as part of God, is an uncaused power. So God has an uncaused power to create physical reality. And because it's uncaused, it likewise cannot be destroyed. It's not made of parts. It can't be changed. Something that can be changed is made of parts. God is not made of parts. God's power to create physical reality is not made of parts. It can't be changed. It can't be destroyed. So whatever that uncaused power entails, that's it. Even God can't change it. He can't make it, he can't expand it in size or reduce it in size. He can't change it because it's uncaused. You can't change that which is uncaused and not made of parts. God cannot create his power to create physical reality. That is something that is part of God. Um, So it's an uncaused power. So whatever that power is, God's stuck with it, can't change it. And whatever toolbox God is given in order to create physical reality is also uncaused, and he's stuck with that toolbox. So we know some of the tools in that toolbox are like atoms and energy. I don't know what's in God's toolbox, but I do know there's a the things that our universe are made of are clearly in that toolbox from which God creates physical reality. Whatever else is in there, I have no idea. But that toolbox is also uncaused, so God can't change that. So, because God's power to create physical reality is uncaused, it cannot be changed. God has to use whatever He has. That's it. And when you talk about everythingness, all things that are logically possible for physical reality, there is a basic principle, a logical principle to that, which is that the simple must outnumber the complex. So, in terms of, if you think of everything that is logically possible, the simpler things will always outnumber the complex things. That's a logical necessity of the idea of everything that is logically possible. So that's an uncaused principle of everythingness. The simple must always outnumber the complex. And God is stuck with that principle when he creates physical reality because his power is uncaused, the toolbox is uncaused. The idea of his power to create everything that is logically possible is uncaused. God is stuck with this principle that the simple must always outnumber the complex. That's a logical necessity of the whole scope of everythingness. If you look at everything that is logically possible, the simpler things will always outnumber the more complex things. Okay, so what does this mean? Well, miracles are complex. Now, I'm not saying they're complex in the sense that it's difficult for God to do. It's not. God can simply snap his fingers and it occurs. But in terms of changing the laws of physics, the natural course of things, a miracle is very complex. You have to change uh, physical reality and the laws of nature, at least in a particular area where this miracle is occurring, in order for it to happen. You have to change the entire course and laws of the universe in order to do it. Uh, Now, that's not to say God can't do it. He can, and he can do it at the snap of his proverbial finger. But it's still a complex action because you're changing the ordinary simple laws of physics. So miracles are complex things in that sense. So because of that, um, under a principle of everythingness, because miracles are complex, they are fewer and far between. They have to be. This is a logical necessity of everythingness that God cannot escape because it's an uncaused power to create out of everythingness. So that's why miracles are few and far between. God can certainly do miracles. It's just that they have to be few and far between because that's the uncaused nature and principle of everythingness, as explained in the dichotomy of existence. So God can't be a genie in the bottle because that would require constant miracles, which are constant complexities, which would be impossible. Essentially, it's a logical impossibility because of the principle in everythingness that the simple must always outnumber the complex. It's an uncaused um, confinement of God's power to create. There is no power that exists that would allow God to do frequent miracles like a genie. It doesn't exist. It's an illogical possibility. Much like a square circle, it's an impossibility because you're dealing with an uncaused everythingness principle and you can't change it. Therefore, it's an impossibility for God to be a genie in the bottle. Can't do it. And it's not a knock on God's omnipotence. It's simply not a real power. It's not a real possible power. It's an illusory power. The idea that God could act like a genie is an illusory idea. It's an illusory power. It can't occur under the principles of everythingness. So the end result is, sure, God would love to provide everybody the proof that he knows that would be necessary in order for them to believe God exists. But he can't. He can't because of the uncaused power to create and the principle in everythingness that the simple must always outnumber the complex. And miracles are complex. And he consequently he can only do them infrequently. They are few and far between. God cannot be a genie. God is not a magician. God does not have a magic wand like a genie would. Um, God does not perform magic. It's connected to an uncaused power to create physical reality. And those things have logical limitations and God is subject to them because God cannot change that power. They're uncaused. They cannot be changed even by God. All right, so I hope you learned something. This this is a serious atheistic objection. There is a way out of it. It requires an understanding of the dichotomy of existence and God's uncaused power. That's a point that many people don't seem to understand, that God is uncaused. And that means God's powers are also uncaused, which means God can't create his own powers, can't change his powers. So people get this cartoonish idea that God can do anything, even the impossible, at the snap of a finger, much like a genie would, some sort of magical being. And that's simply not true at all. That is not what God is. God is subject to logical limitations on his uncaused power. And there is no, since genies and magic don't exist in reality, there is no power that would permit such things, such magical nonsense. It's not a knock on God. God is the greatest being that there can be due to logic and reasoning, logical limitations. So genies are mythical nonsense, essentially. It's like a square circle almost. Um, but people get this cartoonish idea that God is like a genie, and that's just wrong. And you can correct your own thinking in those regards as well, if necessary. But a lot of atheists and even Christians and believers have this cartoonish idea of God that he's a genie, and it's just incorrect, and that God can do anything, even the impossible, and has a magic wand. That's all incorrect. That's all very naive notion of God. It's a childish notion of God, and you should have a much more adult notion of God. All right. Well, I hope you learned something, and take care.